On the evening of March 17, 2024, the peaceful routine of downtown Phoenix was shattered in a matter of minutes. The temperature had just begun to drop after a typically warm Arizona spring day when 29-year-old Eliza Reeves left her job at a local tech company where she worked as a software developer. The parking garage on West Adams Street was dimly lit as usual, with several burned-out bulbs that the property management had repeatedly promised to replace. Eliza had followed her usual routine that day. Security footage later recovered from the building showed her leaving at 7:42 p.m., laptop bag slung over her shoulder, stopping briefly to chat with the night security guard before heading toward the parking structure. This ordinary moment would be the last normal one Eliza would experience for months to come. What happened in the next 17 minutes would change her life forever and eventually spark a landmark investigation that would challenge the justice system in Arizona. According to the initial police report, Eliza was attacked on level 3 of the parking structure, in a corner deliberately chosen for its lack of surveillance coverage. The assault was brutal and calculated, leaving Eliza unconscious with multiple injuries that would require extensive hospitalization. The first responder on the scene was Officer James Rivera, who had been patrolling nearby when the emergency call came through at 8:11 p.m. Victim found in parking structure level 3 west corner. Apparent assault. Requesting immediate medical assistance, his radio transmission documented. Officer Rivera's body camera footage, later crucial to the investigation, showed him discovering Eliza lying between two parked vehicles, her belongings scattered around her. The Phoenix Police Department dispatched Detective Morgan Vance to the scene 40 minutes later. At 43, Vance was an 11-year veteran of the Violent Crimes Bureau, with a reputation for methodical investigation and unwavering persistence. The case file notes that upon arrival, Vance immediately recognized the challenges they would face: a crime scene with minimal physical evidence, no known witnesses, and a victim unable to provide immediate testimony. The perpetrator knew what they were doing, Vance noted in her preliminary report. The location was specifically chosen to avoid cameras. The attack appears targeted rather than random, suggesting premeditation. The initial evidence collection yielded disappointing results. The parking garage's concrete floor retained almost no usable footprints. No weapons were recovered at the scene. The only potential lead came from Eliza herself, specifically from beneath her fingernails. During the attack, she had fought back fiercely, and forensic technician Raj Patel discovered skin cells and trace DNA material that suggested she had managed to scratch her attacker. "This might be our only physical connection to the perpetrator," Patel told Detective Vance, as they stood under the harsh lights of the garage at nearly midnight. "Given the location and circumstances, I'm not optimistic about finding much else." Eliza was transported to Maricopa Medical Center in critical condition. The medical report detailed multiple contusions, a concussion, 3 broken ribs, and a fractured wrist. Dr. Sophia Chen, the attending physician, noted in her report that the pattern of injuries indicated a targeted attack with significant force, consistent with an assailant larger and stronger than the victim. While Eliza fought for recovery in the hospital, Detective Vance began the painstaking process of building a case with frustratingly little evidence. The first 48 hours of any investigation are crucial, but this one presented unique challenges. No witnesses had come forward despite public appeals. The surveillance cameras in the vicinity had either been deliberately avoided or in 2 cases had malfunctioned earlier that week. What made the case particularly sensitive was Eliza's identity as a transgender woman. Detective Vance, having worked with the LGBTQ+ liaison officer in previous cases, immediately recognized the possibility that this was a hate crime. Statistics from the Human Rights Campaign had shown a disturbing increase in violence against transgender individuals in Arizona over the previous 2 years. 3 days after the attack, when Eliza regained consciousness, Detective Vance conducted her first interview. Although heavily sedated and still traumatized, Eliza managed to provide some information. She couldn't identify her attacker. The assault had occurred from behind and she never got a clear look at the person's face. However, she recalled one critical detail: a distinctive voice that had muttered slurs, specifically targeting her transgender identity before the first blow landed. "It wasn't random," Eliza whispered through cracked lips in the recorded interview. "They knew who I was. They were waiting for me." This statement transformed the investigation. What might have been classified as a violent mugging was now clearly categorized as a targeted attack, potentially motivated by prejudice. Detective Vance immediately expanded the scope of the investigation, requesting access to Eliza's social media accounts, email and phone records to identify any prior threats. The DNA evidence collected from Eliza's fingernails became the central focus of the investigation. The sample was small, but potentially crucial. It was rushed to the Arizona Department of Public Safety Crime Laboratory, where forensic scientist Leila Hernandez began the meticulous process of analysis. "We're looking at partial genetic profiles," Hernandez explained to Detective Vance on March 22nd. "It's not ideal, but modern techniques might give us enough for identification if we can find a suspect for comparison." Meanwhile, a deeper look into Eliza's life revealed troubling patterns. As a software developer who had transitioned 3 years earlier, she had documented multiple instances of harassment, though none that had escalated to physical violence. Her social media accounts contained several concerning comments from anonymous users in the weeks leading up to the attack. One comment in particular, posted just 11 days before the assault, stood out. "People like you don't belong here. Someone should teach you a lesson." The account had been created specifically to post this comment and was deleted shortly afterward. But digital forensics specialist Tyler McKenzie believed they might be able to trace the IP address. By the end of March, the investigation had expanded to include Detective Marcus Shelby from the Cyber Crimes Unit. Shelby's expertise in digital forensics provided a new avenue for the investigation. While physical evidence remained scarce, the digital trail was beginning to yield results. Whoever did this wasn't as careful online as they were at the crime scene, Shelby noted in his first briefing with Vance. The anonymous accounts targeting Eliza show consistent behavioral patterns. "We're dealing with someone who harbors significant prejudice against transgender individuals and has technical knowledge, but not expertise." On April 3rd, a potential breakthrough emerged from an unexpected source. The property management company for the parking garage, responding to repeated requests from the police department, finally provided maintenance records that revealed something interesting. A service technician had been called to repair several lights on level 3 the week before the attack, but had been turned away by someone claiming to be from building security. No such security directive had been issued, suggesting the perpetrator may have deliberately ensured the area would remain poorly lit. The maintenance company provided a description of the person who had intercepted them: male, approximately 6 feet tall, Caucasian, with light brown hair and a beard. While this description was too general to narrow down suspects significantly, it was the first physical description of someone potentially connected to the crime. As April progressed, Detective Vance pursued multiple angles. She interviewed Eliza's colleagues, friends, and acquaintances. She reviewed every case involving attacks on LGBTQ+ individuals in the Phoenix area over the past 3 years. She coordinated with advocacy groups to determine if similar incidents had gone unreported due to victims' fear or distrust of law enforcement. This broader investigation revealed a disturbing pattern. While official statistics showed only 3 reported attacks on transgender individuals in Phoenix during the previous year, advocacy groups had documented at least 11 incidents, most of which had never been formally reported to police. "There's a pattern here that's been invisible to us," Vance admitted during a departmental briefing in mid-April. "We're looking at potentially systematic targeting of trans individuals that's gone largely undetected because victims don't trust that we'll protect them or take their cases seriously." By the end of April, Eliza had been discharged from the hospital, but faced months of physical therapy and psychological counseling. The attack had not only left physical scars, but had profoundly impacted her sense of safety and well-being. Yet despite this trauma, she made a decision that would ultimately prove crucial to the case. She chose to speak out. On April 27th, with Detective Vance's cautious approval, Eliza held a small press conference organized by the Arizona Transgender Alliance. Her face still showing signs of the attack, she addressed the cameras with remarkable composure. "I won't be silenced by hate," she stated, her voice steady despite the visible pain it caused her to stand at the podium. "What happened to me isn't just about me, it's about every transgender person who lives in fear. I'm working with the police not just to find who did this to me, but to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." This public statement changed the dynamics of the case. Tips began coming in, some credible, others clearly false. The increased attention brought both benefits and complications to the investigation. While Detective Vance now had more resources and public support, She also had to carefully filter through the influx of information to identify valuable leads. By early May, the forensic lab had completed its analysis of the DNA evidence. The results confirmed it belonged to a male individual, and the profile was entered into the Combined DNA Index System, CODIS. No immediate match was found, indicating the perpetrator had no prior felony convictions in the system. "It's disappointing but not surprising," Vance told her supervisor. "We're likely dealing with someone who has harbored these violent tendencies but has never been caught, or someone who has escalated from lesser forms of harassment that wouldn't have resulted in DNA collection." As May turned to June, the case seemed to be losing momentum. Despite the increased attention and resources, no clear suspect had emerged. The digital trail had gone cold after several anonymous accounts were traced to public libraries and internet cafes where user identification was impossible. But Detective Vance remained undeterred. In a move that would later be recognized as pivotal to the case, she requested approval for an expanded search of private DNA databases, a controversial technique that had begun to solve cold cases across the country. This approach, while raising privacy concerns, offered a potential breakthrough when traditional methods had failed. As the summer heat intensified in Phoenix, the investigation entered a new phase. The DNA collected from beneath Eliza's fingernails wasn't just evidence anymore. It had become the key that would eventually unlock the identity of her attacker and lead to one of the most significant hate crime prosecutions in Arizona's history. What no one yet knew was that the man responsible for the attack was still in Phoenix, watching the news coverage of the case with growing concern and making plans that would eventually lead to his undoing. The investigation was about to take a turn that would reveal not just a single act of violence, but a pattern of hatred that had gone undetected for years. As June 2024 began, Eliza Reeves was slowly rebuilding her life. 3 months after the attack, she had progressed from using a wheelchair to walking with a cane, her physical therapy sessions showing promising results. The psychological wounds, however, proved more persistent than the physical ones. Nightmares plagued her sleep, and she had developed a hypervigilance that made simple tasks like walking to her car an exercise in controlled panic. Detective Morgan Vance maintained regular contact with Eliza, providing updates on the investigation while carefully managing expectations. On June 7th, during one of their scheduled meetings at a cafe near Eliza's apartment, chosen because Eliza no longer felt comfortable meeting in isolated places, Vance noticed something had changed in her demeanor. "I've been contacted by other trans women," Eliza revealed, her fingers tightening around her coffee cup. 5 of them, all from Phoenix or Tempe, all attacked in the past 18 months. None of them reported it to the police. This revelation confirmed what Vance had begun to suspect, a pattern of unreported violence against the transgender community in Maricopa County. With Eliza's help, Vance arranged informal interviews with these individuals. Their stories shared disturbing similarities: attacks in parking structures or dimly lit areas, assailants who seemed to know their routines, and in 3 cases, explicit anti-trans slurs during the assault. None of the victims could provide a clear description of their attacker, but 2 mentioned a distinctive detail, a peculiar smell they described as chemical or like strong cleaning products. This matched a detail Eliza had mentioned in a follow-up interview, but had initially attributed to the parking garage environment. By mid-June, Vance had compiled enough evidence to suggest they might be dealing with a serial offender. She presented her findings to Captain Roland Torres, requesting additional resources and the formation of a task force. "These attacks show consistent methodology," Vance argued in the recorded meeting. "The perpetrator studies the victim's routines, chooses locations with minimal surveillance, and strikes when they're alone. The level of planning indicates someone with patience and intelligence." Torres approved the formation of a small task force, bringing in Detective Marcus Shelby, permanently from cybercrimes, and adding Officer Nadia Kazemi, who had extensive experience working with vulnerable communities. The team established a dedicated tip line and began cross-referencing data from all known and suspected related cases. Meanwhile, Eliza had channeled her trauma into action. With support from local advocacy organizations, she founded Phoenix Rising, a support group for LGBTQ+ survivors of violence. The group's first meeting, held in a community center with security provided by volunteers, drew 27 attendees, a number that shocked even Eliza and reinforced the reality of underreported violence. "We can't change what happened to us," Eliza told the group, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "But we can change what happens next. We can support each other, and we can work with authorities who are genuinely trying to help." Detective Vance attended this first meeting, not to gather evidence, but to listen. What she heard transformed her understanding of the barriers between law enforcement and the transgender community. Multiple attendees described previous negative experiences with police, being misgendered, having their complaints dismissed, or worse, being treated as though they had somehow provoked the attacks against them. On June 24th, an unexpected development arose when the Arizona Department of Public Safety announced the implementation of a new DNA analysis technique, probabilistic genotyping, that could extract more information from partial or mixed DNA samples. The timing couldn't have been better for Vance's investigation. "We need to resubmit our samples," Vance told forensic scientist Leila Hernandez. "This new system might give us details we couldn't see before." Hernandez agreed, though she cautioned about expectations. "It's not magic. It won't create DNA that isn't there, but it might help us build a more complete profile from what we have." The reanalysis would take several weeks, during which the investigation continued along other avenues. Officer Kazemi established a confidential reporting system specifically for the transgender community, resulting in 4 more individuals coming forward with accounts of harassment or assault. None had evidence as substantial as Eliza's case, but together they created a map of incidents concentrated in central Phoenix and parts of Tempe near the university. July brought both progress and frustration. The enhanced DNA analysis had yielded additional markers, creating a more detailed profile of the attacker. The profile confirmed they were looking for a male of primarily Northern European ancestry, likely in his 30s or 40s, based on the methylation patterns of the DNA, a technique that can roughly estimate age. However, without a suspect for comparison, even this improved profile couldn't identify the perpetrator. The task force needed a break, and it came from an unexpected source: social media. Detective Shelby had been monitoring various platforms for patterns of harassment against transgender individuals in the Phoenix area. On July 12th, he identified a cluster of accounts that consistently posted transphobic content and occasionally made veiled threats. Most were anonymous, but one, using the username BiologicalReality84, had made a specific reference to Eliza's case. "Scratch all you want," the comment read on a news article about the investigation. "Some truths can't be changed by clawing at them." The comment was disturbing not just for its content, but for its specific reference to scratching, a detail that hadn't been widely reported. Eliza had scratched her attacker in self-defense, but this information had been kept confidential to preserve the integrity of the investigation. "This person either knows the attacker or is the attacker," Shelby concluded during an emergency meeting of the task force. No one else would know about the scratching specifically. Tracking the account proved challenging. The user had employed VPN services and created the account using a temporary email address. However, pattern analysis of posting times suggested the user was likely in the Mountain Time zone and typically active between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., potentially indicating night shift work or insomnia. As July progressed into August, the task force expanded its digital surveillance. With judicial approval, they monitored IP addresses associated with anti-trans content that specifically mentioned Eliza or Phoenix Rising. They created a database of linguistic patterns from these posts, looking for consistent stylistic markers that might link multiple accounts to a single author. Eliza, meanwhile, had become an increasingly visible advocate. A local news station featured her in a segment about violence against transgender individuals, and she participated in a panel discussion at Arizona State University about hate crimes and community response. While these appearances helped raise awareness, they also increased her public profile, something that concerned Detective Vance. "I understand why you're doing this," Vance told Eliza during a security assessment meeting in early August, "but the person who attacked you is still out there and he might be watching." "I know," Eliza responded, her resolve evident, "but hiding won't protect anyone else. If he's watching me, he's not targeting someone else during that time." This comment revealed Eliza's transformation from victim to advocate, but it also highlighted the psychological toll of the ongoing investigation. Despite her public strength, private sessions with her therapist revealed persistent trauma and fear, emotions she channeled into her advocacy work. By mid-August, Phoenix Rising had established a dedicated hotline and safe house network for transgender individuals facing threats or homelessness. The group's work had begun to change the conversation about transgender safety in Arizona, bringing attention to issues that had long been ignored or minimized. As summer's intense heat began to wane, the investigation reached a critical juncture. The enhanced DNA profile had been continuously run against databases, and the digital surveillance had identified several persons of interest who consistently engaged in anti-trans rhetoric online. What the task force needed was something to connect these digital footprints to physical evidence. That connection came on August 27th, when a member of Phoenix Rising reported being followed after leaving a group meeting. The individual, a transgender man named Julian, who had been helping with the organization's security protocols, noticed the same vehicle behind him for several miles. Instead of going home, he drove to a police station where officers identified the driver as 34-year-old Darren Keller. Keller claimed he had simply been driving in the same direction and had no connection to Julian or Phoenix Rising. With no evidence of a crime, officers could only issue a warning before releasing him. However, they documented the incident and forwarded the report to Detective Vance. When Vance ran Keller's name through their systems, several red flags appeared. He worked as a maintenance technician for a property management company that serviced several buildings in central Phoenix, including ones near previous attack sites. His work schedule typically ended at 10 p.m., aligning with the time frame when Biological Reality K4 was most active online. Most significantly, his company had been contracted for maintenance at the parking garage where Eliza was attacked, though records didn't show him specifically assigned to that location. These coincidences weren't enough for an arrest, but they made Keller the prime suspect in the investigation. The task force began building a profile, discreetly interviewing his co-workers and neighbors, and monitoring his online activities through legally obtained warrants. By early September, 6 months after the attack on Eliza, they had accumulated enough circumstantial evidence to consider Keller a serious suspect. What they needed was his DNA to compare against the sample from Eliza's fingernails, the one piece of evidence that could conclusively link him to the crime. As autumn approached, the investigation was about to enter its most challenging phase, one that would test the legal boundaries of modern forensic techniques and ultimately reveal a network of hatred that extended far beyond a single violent attack in a parking garage. By mid-September 2024, the investigation into Eliza Reeves's attack had reached a critical stage. Detective Morgan Vance and her task force had identified Darren Keller as their prime suspect, but connecting him definitively to the crime required more than circumstantial evidence. Without probable cause for a warrant to collect his DNA, the team needed to build a stronger case. On September 18th, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Officer Jason McAllister, reviewing security footage from businesses near the parking garage where Eliza was attacked, noticed something overlooked in the initial investigation. A camera from a convenience store 2 blocks away had captured partial footage of a man walking briskly away from the direction of the parking structure at 8:07 p.m. on the night of the attack, just minutes before Officer Rivera received the emergency call. The image quality was poor, showing only the subject's back and profile, but the build and gait were consistent with Darren Keller's physical characteristics. More importantly, the timestamp aligned perfectly with the estimated time of the assault. "It's not enough for an identification," McAllister explained during the task force briefing, but it put someone matching Keller's general description in the vicinity at exactly the right time. Detective Shelby from Cybercrimes suggested enhancing the footage using new AI-assisted technology recently acquired by the department. The process took 3 days, and while it couldn't perform miracles with the low-resolution source material, it did reveal 2 crucial details. The subject was wearing work boots consistent with those worn by maintenance personnel, and there appeared to be a logo on his jacket that matched the uniform of Service Pro, Keller's employer. This puts him within 2 blocks of the crime scene, within minutes of the attack wearing his work uniform, Vance summarized. "It's still circumstantial, but the timeline is getting tighter." Simultaneously, the digital investigation had begun yielding results. The task force had obtained warrants to examine online activities associated with several IP addresses linked to transphobic content. One of these addresses, accessed through a public library's Wi-Fi network, had been used to create the Biological Reality 84A account. Library records showed that Darren Keller had checked out books during the same timeframes when the account was active from that location. More disturbing were the discoveries from a deeper analysis of the online footprint. Forensic linguist Dr. Amelia Sato, consulting with the task force, identified distinctive writing patterns across multiple accounts that suggested a single author. These accounts had not only posted harassing comments directed at Eliza, but had also participated in private messaging groups dedicated to tracking the locations and routines of transgender individuals in Phoenix. The language shows consistent patterns of hyphenation, unusual comma placement, and specific ideological terminology, Dr. Sato explained. The probability of these being different individuals is extremely low. On September 25th, Detective Vance presented these findings to District Attorney Tyler Donahue, hoping for enough leverage to obtain a warrant for Keller's DNA. Donahue, a 45-year-old prosecutor with a reputation for thoroughness, reviewed the evidence with a critical eye. "What you have is compelling pattern evidence," Donahue acknowledged, "but courts have been increasingly strict about digital evidence without corroboration. We need something more concrete before a judge will grant a DNA warrant." Frustrated but undeterred, Vance returned to fundamentals. If they couldn't yet get Keller's DNA legally, they needed to strengthen the circumstantial case until it became overwhelming. She assigned Officer Kazemi to discreetly interview Keller's former colleagues and acquaintances, building a behavioral profile that might reveal additional evidence. Meanwhile, Eliza continued her advocacy work, unaware of how close investigators were to identifying her attacker. Phoenix Rising had grown into a recognized organization with partnerships across Arizona. In late September, Eliza participated in a community safety workshop with the Phoenix Police Department, an event that inadvertently created another connection in the case. During the workshop, an officer mentioned that several transgender individuals had reported being photographed without consent in public places. When shown examples of these incidents, Detective Shelby noticed that the metadata from one set of photos contained GPS coordinates and device information from a phone model matching one registered to Darren Keller. "He's documenting them," Shelby realized, creating a catalog of potential targets. This discovery accelerated the investigation. With evidence suggesting that Keller might be planning additional attacks, the task force obtained emergency surveillance authorization. On October 3rd, they began monitoring Keller's movements while continuing to build their case for a DNA warrant. The surveillance revealed disturbing patterns. Keller frequently parked near LGBTQ+ friendly establishments, remaining in his vehicle for hours while apparently observing patrons. He made regular visits to the library to use public computers despite having internet access at home, a common tactic to avoid leaving digital traces. Most concerning was his repeated presence near locations where Eliza was scheduled to appear for Phoenix Rising events, suggesting he was still fixated on her specifically. On October 11th, 7 months after the attack, Prosecutor Donahue reviewed the accumulated evidence and determined they had reached the threshold for probable cause. Judge Marissa Fernandez signed a warrant authorizing surveillance of Keller's online activities directly from his home internet connection, a significant escalation in the investigation. The results were immediate and damning. Keller's private browsing history revealed extensive research on Eliza and other transgender individuals in Phoenix. He had created detailed documents tracking their routines, including work schedules, regular appointments, and frequently visited locations. Most disturbing was a folder of images titled Next, containing surveillance photos of 3 transgender women with notes about their patterns of movement. "We've got more than enough for the DNA warrant now," Donahue confirmed on October 15th. "And based on this evidence of potential future attacks, I'm also requesting an arrest warrant for stalking and criminal threatening." The following morning, detectives arrived at Keller's apartment with both warrants in hand. The arrest proceeded without incident, with Keller appearing surprisingly calm as officers took him into custody. During the standard booking procedure, DNA samples were collected via cheek swab and immediately sent to the crime lab for comparison against the evidence from Eliza's case. A search of Keller's apartment revealed the full extent of his obsession. A wall in his spare bedroom was covered with photos and information about transgender individuals in Phoenix, with Eliza's information at the center. Investigators discovered journals detailing his beliefs about protecting society from what he termed gender deception, along with detailed accounts of multiple attacks, some previously reported, others unknown to authorities. "This goes beyond a single attack," Vance told Captain Torres during their briefing that evening. "We're looking at what appears to be a years-long campaign targeting the transgender community. Based on his journals, Eliza wasn't his first victim. She was just the first who fought back effectively enough to leave evidence." As Keller was processed into the county jail on preliminary charges of stalking and criminal threatening, the DNA comparison was expedited at the state crime lab. Forensic scientist Leila Hernandez personally oversaw the analysis, understanding the significance of the case. On October 19th, Hernandez called Detective Vance with the results. "It's a match 99.8% probability. The DNA under Eliza's fingernails is definitely Darren Keller's." With this confirmation, additional charges were filed: aggravated assault, battery with intent to cause serious bodily harm, and hate crime enhancements that significantly increased the potential sentencing range. Prosecutor Donahue also began preparing to present evidence of the other attacks documented in Keller's journals to establish a pattern of behavior. When informed of the arrest and DNA match, Eliza experienced mixed emotions: relief that her attacker had been identified, fear knowing he had continued to monitor her, and vindication that her decision to fight back had provided the crucial evidence. "He kept watching me all this time," she said quietly to Detective Vance during their meeting to discuss the arrest. "Even while I was building Phoenix Rising, he was there in the shadows." "Your organization helped us find him," Vance explained. "The network you built created a community that started noticing patterns, reporting suspicious behavior. You turned your trauma into protection for others." As October drew to a close, the case against Darren Keller strengthened further. Digital forensics uncovered his connections to an online forum called Gender Reality Alliance, a group that shared techniques for identifying and targeting transgender individuals. This discovery expanded the investigation beyond Phoenix, with federal authorities becoming involved to examine potential links to similar attacks in other states. What had begun as the investigation of a single violent assault had uncovered a coordinated campaign of hatred and violence that had operated undetected for years. As Keller awaited trial in custody, denied bail due to the risk he posed to the community, the task force continued piecing together the full extent of his activities and connections. The digital trails that Keller thought would remain hidden had ultimately led investigators directly to him, proving that in the modern era, even the most careful predators leave traces in the virtual world. These electronic breadcrumbs, combined with the DNA evidence Eliza had literally scratched from her attacker, had created a case that would be nearly impossible to defend against. As November began, the focus shifted from investigation to prosecution, with the trial date set for early 2025. What no one yet realized was that the case would soon take another dramatic turn, one that would reveal the true extent of Keller's network and test the legal system's ability to address organized hatred in the digital age. As November 2024 began, Darren Keller sat in a cell at the Maricopa County Jail, his world reduced to a 8-10-foot space. The 34-year-old maintenance technician, who had spent years meticulously tracking others while avoiding detection himself, was now under constant surveillance. The irony wasn't lost on Detective Morgan Vance as she prepared for her first formal interview with the suspect. On November 3rd, Vance and prosecutor Tyler Donahue met Keller in an interview room at the detention center. Keller had been appointed a public defender, Melissa Ortega, who advised him against speaking with investigators. Despite this counsel, Keller insisted on the meeting. "I want to explain myself," he told his attorney within earshot of the recording equipment. "They need to understand why this is happening." Keller sat with perfect posture, his prison jumpsuit neat and his expression composed. Nothing in his appearance suggested the violent hatred documented in his journals and online activities. This disconnect between his ordinary appearance and extraordinary malice had helped him remain undetected for so long. "I've been watching your career, Detective Vance," Keller began, his voice calm and measured. "You've built quite a reputation for solving difficult cases. I respected your methodical approach, even as you closed in on me." Vance maintained a neutral expression, recognizing Keller's attempt to establish rapport through flattery. "We're here to discuss your attack on Eliza Reeves on March 17th and the other assaults documented in your journals." Keller's demeanor shifted slightly at the mention of the journals. "Those were private thoughts, theoretical scenarios. You can't prosecute someone for their thoughts." "We're prosecuting you for your actions," Donahue interjected. "Actions corroborated by DNA evidence, surveillance footage, digital records, and your own written accounts. What followed was a 3-hour interview in which Keller alternated between denial, justification, and attempts to minimize his actions. He admitted to monitoring transgender individuals, but described it as research rather than stalking. He acknowledged authoring the transphobic online content, but characterized it as protected speech. When confronted about the attack on Eliza, he initially denied involvement despite the DNA evidence. "Science can be mistaken," he claimed. "Labs make errors." As the interview progressed, Vance employed a strategy of presenting evidence methodically, piece by piece, gradually dismantling Keller's denials. When shown enhanced images of himself near the crime scene, Keller suggested it was coincidental. When presented with the timeline of his movements that evening, he claimed memory lapses. But when confronted with entries from his own journal describing the attack, including details only the perpetrator could know, his composure finally cracked. "They're infiltrating everything," Keller said, his voice rising as his carefully maintained facade began to crumble. "Schools, workplaces, even public bathrooms. Someone has to protect society from this contagion." Defense attorney Ortega attempted to end the interview at this point, recognizing her client was incriminating himself, but Keller waved her off. His need to justify his worldview had overcome his legal self-interest. "What happened to Eliza Reeves wasn't random," he continued, unconsciously echoing Eliza's own words from her hospital bed. "She was visible, promoting this lifestyle, influencing others. I didn't plan to hurt her that badly, I just wanted to send a message." With this statement, recorded and witnessed, Keller had effectively confessed to the attack while establishing premeditation and bias motivation, key elements for both the assault charges and hate crime enhancements. Following the interview, Prosecutor Donahue updated the charges against Keller. The case now included 6 counts of aggravated assault, 3 counts of stalking, and multiple hate crime enhancements. If convicted on all counts, Keller faced up to 25 years in prison. News of Keller's arrest and confession sent ripples through Phoenix. For the transgender community, it brought both relief and renewed anxiety. Relief that a predator had been apprehended, anxiety about how many others like him might exist. For Eliza and Phoenix Rising, it validated their advocacy work while highlighting how much remained to be done. "One arrest doesn't solve the systemic issues," Eliza told reporters outside the courthouse after Keller's arraignment on November 10th. "But it shows that violence against transgender people will be taken seriously and investigated thoroughly." As November progressed, the case attracted national attention. News outlets covered the story from various angles, some focusing on the innovative investigative techniques, others on the implications for hate crime legislation, and some, unfortunately, sensationalizing aspects of Eliza's identity rather than focusing on the crime itself. This media attention brought unexpected complications. Online forums sympathetic to Keller's views began portraying him as a political prisoner and victim of thought policing. Small but vocal groups of protesters appeared at court proceedings, holding signs with slogans supporting Keller. More concerning were the threats directed at Eliza, Detective Vance, and Prosecutor Donahue. "We're monitoring all threats," Captain Torres assured them during a security briefing on November 18th. "Additional patrols have been assigned to your residences, and all electronic communications are being screened." Meanwhile, the investigation continued to expand as authorities examined Keller's connections to like-minded individuals. His participation in the Gender Reality Alliance Forum had opened a window into an informal network spanning multiple states. While most participants limited themselves to rhetoric, evidence suggested some had moved beyond words to actions. "We've identified 3 other members who've described confrontations with transgender individuals," FBI agent Samantha Reed explained during a joint briefing with local law enforcement. 2 in Nevada, 1 in Utah. "We're coordinating with authorities in those jurisdictions to review unsolved assaults with similar patterns." On November 25th, defense attorney Ortega filed motions to suppress Keller's confession and journal entries, arguing that the initial surveillance had been improperly obtained and that the subsequent warrants were therefore fruit of the poisonous tree. Judge Raymond Hernandez scheduled hearings for early December to address these challenges. The legal maneuvering intensified as Keller, seemingly recognizing the gravity of his situation, became more cooperative with his defense team. His public statements shifted from ideological justifications to claims of mental health issues and requests for psychological evaluation. My client's actions were the result of untreated paranoid delusions, Ortega told reporters. We'll be pursuing a mental health defense and seeking appropriate treatment rather than punitive incarceration. This strategy faced significant hurdles. Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Nathan Chen, evaluating Keller at the court's request, found no evidence of psychosis or diminished capacity. His preliminary report, filed on December 5th, stated, "Subject demonstrates organized thinking, awareness of consequences, and the ability to distinguish right from wrong. His extremist viewpoints, while disturbing, do not constitute a mental illness that would impair his legal responsibility." As December progressed, prosecutors methodically strengthened their case. Digital forensics experts recovered deleted communications between Keller and other forum members, including discussions about Eliza specifically. Analysis of his phone's location data confirmed his presence near numerous attack sites documented in his journals. Financial records showed purchases of surveillance equipment and multiple burner phones used to hide his digital tracks. Most damning was the recovery of a trophy collection hidden in a storage unit rented under a false name. The unit contained items taken from various victims, a technique common among serial offenders to relive their crimes. Among these items was Eliza's employee ID badge, which had disappeared during the attack in March. On December 12th, Judge Hernandez denied all defense motions to suppress evidence, ruling that the surveillance and subsequent warrants had been properly obtained based on escalating evidence of criminal activity and potential imminent harm to others. With his legal options dwindling, Keller made a desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative. Through his attorney, he offered to plead guilty to reduced charges if prosecutors would agree not to pursue investigations into other forum members. "He's trying to protect his network," Vance observed during strategy discussions with Donahue. "This confirms our suspicion that others were directly involved or at least had knowledge of his activities." Donahue rejected the offer outright. "We're not interested in partial justice," he informed Ortega. "Every individual involved in planning or executing these attacks will be held accountable." By mid-December, the pre-trial proceedings had established most of the key facts. Keller had systematically targeted transgender individuals over at least 3 years. The attack on Eliza had been premeditated, motivated by bias, and part of a larger campaign of violence. His actions had been documented in his own words, corroborated by physical evidence, and ultimately confirmed by DNA. What remained unclear was the full extent of the network behind him. While Keller had acted alone in physically carrying out the attacks, the investigation had uncovered evidence of encouragement, tactical advice, and information sharing among forum members. The legal question of whether these individuals could be charged as accessories was complex and largely untested in Arizona courts. As Christmas approached, bringing temporary quiet to the legal proceedings, both prosecution and defense prepared for what promised to be a landmark trial. For Eliza, the holiday season brought mixed emotions: gratitude for justice in her case, grief for those whose attackers remained unidentified, and determination to continue the work of Phoenix Rising. "Next year will be different," she told members at their year-end gathering. "We've shown that fighting back works, both in the moment of attack and in the longer struggle for justice and recognition." What no one at that gathering could have anticipated was that the new year would bring an unexpected development, one that would transform not only Keller's case, but the broader legal approach to organized hatred in the digital era. As 2024 drew to a close, the stage was set for a trial that would establish precedents for years to come. January 2025 arrived with unusual chill in Phoenix, the desert air crisp, as the legal system resumed its methodical pace after the holiday break. For Detective Morgan Vance, the new year brought both anticipation and apprehension. The case against Darren Keller was strong, but hate crime prosecutions remained challenging, even with substantial evidence. On January 6th, Judge Raymond Hernandez issued a key ruling that shaped the coming trial. The prosecution would be permitted to present evidence of Keller's other documented attacks to establish pattern and intent, overriding defense objections about prejudicial impact. This decision significantly strengthened the state's case, allowing prosecutors to paint a complete picture of Keller's systematic campaign against transgender individuals. "This isn't about one isolated incident," Prosecutor Donahue explained to his team. "The court has recognized that we're dealing with an organized pattern of behavior that must be understood in its entirety." As the legal proceedings advanced, forensic scientist Leila Hernandez continued analyzing the DNA evidence, employing newly available techniques to extract additional information. On January 12th, she requested a meeting with Detective Vance and Prosecutor Donahue. "We've been able to develop a more comprehensive genetic profile from the samples," Hernandez explained in her lab, displaying complex charts on her monitor. "The advanced analysis confirms our original match to Keller with even higher certainty, 98% probability now, but it's also revealed something unexpected." Hernandez pointed to a specific section of the DNA profile. "These markers suggest genetic relatives were also in the system. Following this lead, we identified partial matches with DNA from 2 unsolved assault cases, one in Tucson from 2022, another in Las Vegas from 2023. Both victims were transgender women." "Are you saying Keller committed those attacks as well?" Vance asked. "No," Hernandez replied. "The matches aren't close enough for that. But they suggest the perpetrators could be biologically related to Keller, potentially siblings or first cousins." This revelation transformed the investigation. With judicial approval, detectives examined Keller's family records, identifying 3 male cousins and a half-brother, all within the age range of potential suspects. Cross-referencing these names against the Gender Reality Alliance Forum membership revealed a disturbing pattern. 2 cousins, Victor and Eric Keller, were active participants under pseudonyms. Victor Keller, 38, lived in Tucson, while Eric Keller, 31, resided in Las Vegas. Both worked in technical fields with irregular hours, allowing flexibility for travel. Most significantly, their online communications with Darren included encrypted messages referring to what they called interventions, a term Darren had used in his journals to describe attacks. By January 18th, investigators had obtained warrants to collect DNA samples from both cousins. The results, expedited through the lab, confirmed what the partial matches had suggested. Victor's DNA matched evidence from the Tucson assault, while Eric's matched the Las Vegas case. "We're not dealing with a lone actor," Vance explained during an emergency task force briefing. "We're looking at a coordinated family operation targeting transgender individuals across 3 cities. With this evidence, federal authorities formally joined the case, as the multi-state nature of the conspiracy triggered federal jurisdiction. FBI agent Reed took lead on coordinating simultaneous arrests in 3 cities, capturing both Victor and Eric Keller without incident on January 24th. When confronted with the DNA evidence, Victor Keller attempted to maintain innocence, but Eric quickly sought a deal, offering to testify against both his cousins in exchange for sentencing considerations. His subsequent debriefing revealed the full extent of their organized campaign. "It started with Darren," Eric explained during his recorded statement. "He was always the ideologue, the one with the strongest views. He convinced us this was some kind of righteous mission. We'd identify targets, share information, and sometimes travel to each other's cities to avoid being recognized locally." According to Eric, the cousins had been responsible for at least 11 attacks across 3 states over the past 3 years, with Darren serving as the primary organizer and strategist. They communicated through encrypted channels, shared techniques, and provided alibis for each other when necessary. "The attack on Eliza Reeves was Darren's operation," Eric confirmed, "but we all knew about it. He was furious afterward because she'd scratched him, which wasn't part of the plan. That's when he became obsessed with her, seeing her as unfinished business." This testimony provided the missing context for Darren's continued surveillance of Eliza after the attack. What had seemed like the fixation of a single offender was revealed as part of a family conspiracy, with Darren determined to prove he could still handle the target, who had effectively fought back. Armed with Eric's testimony and corroborating evidence from all 3 jurisdictions, federal prosecutors joined forces with state authorities to prepare a comprehensive case against what was now being called the Keller Network. The charges expanded to include conspiracy, hate crimes with interstate elements, and criminal organization, statutes typically used against organized crime but increasingly applied to hate groups with operational structures. When presented with the expanded evidence and his cousin's cooperation, Darren Keller's demeanor changed dramatically. The composed, almost professorial suspect from earlier interviews became agitated and defensive, alternately blaming his cousins for escalating the violence and insisting they had all been justified in their actions. "This society is collapsing from within," he declared during a February 1st interview, abandoning all pretense of innocence. "We did what no one else had the courage to do." This outburst, like his earlier confession, was recorded and added to the growing body of evidence. Defense attorney Ortega, recognizing the deteriorating legal position, renewed efforts to reach a plea agreement, efforts prosecutor Donoghue continued to reject. Given the systematic nature of these crimes and their profound impact on an entire community, anything less than full prosecution would be inadequate, Donoghue explained to Eliza during a case update meeting on February 5th. Eliza, who had been closely following developments, nodded in agreement. This isn't just about justice for me anymore. It's about exposing the organized nature of these attacks so people understand this isn't random violence. It's calculated terrorism against transgender people. As February progressed, the legal strategy solidified. Federal authorities would prosecute the conspiracy and interstate aspects, while state prosecutors in Arizona, Nevada, and Utah would handle the individual assault cases in their respective jurisdictions. This approach ensured comprehensive accountability while respecting jurisdictional boundaries. On February 14th, 11 months after the attack on Eliza, the first major hearing under this joint approach took place in federal court. Judge Mariana Diaz presided over proceedings that included prosecutors from 4 jurisdictions and defense teams for all 3 Keller cousins. The courtroom was filled with observers, including advocacy organizations, legal analysts, and members of Phoenix Rising. The hearing focused on the admissibility of the expanded DNA evidence and Eric Keller's testimony. Defense attorneys argued vigorously against both, claiming the familial DNA search constituted an unreasonable extension of the original warrant and that Eric's testimony was inherently unreliable given his incentive to minimize his own culpability. After extensive arguments, Judge Diaz delivered a ruling that would shape the remainder of the case. The DNA evidence was obtained through valid warrants based on reasonable suspicion, and the scientific methodology behind familial matching has been sufficiently established in prior cases. Regarding the witness testimony, the court acknowledges the complexity of evaluating statements from co-conspirators, but finds that appropriate cautions and corroboration requirements can address these concerns without excluding the testimony entirely. This ruling effectively preserved the heart of the prosecution's case. With the DNA evidence secure and Eric's testimony admissible, the remaining legal questions focused primarily on sentencing rather than guilt or innocence. Recognizing this reality, Victor Keller followed his cousin's example on February 18th, agreeing to cooperate in exchange for sentencing considerations. Only Darren maintained his defiance, refusing all plea offers and insisting on his right to trial. By late February, prosecutors had assembled what they described as overwhelming evidence. DNA matches to all 3 cousins from their respective crime scenes, detailed digital communications documenting their coordination, financial records showing travel between attack locations, testimony from 2 co-conspirators, and Darren's own journals and statements. The final piece fell into place on February 25th, when forensic technician Raj Patel completed analysis of a laptop recovered from Victor Keller's residence. The device contained a folder labeled Operations, with subfolders for each attack. Within these folders were surveillance photos of victims, planning documents, and most damning of all, video recordings of several attacks, including partial footage of the assault on Eliza. "He recorded it," Vance said quietly, as she viewed the footage with prosecutor Donoghue. "They documented their crimes like trophies." The existence of these recordings transformed the legal landscape. Faced with video evidence of his own actions, even Darren Keller could no longer maintain his increasingly tenuous claims of innocence or justification. On February 28th, his attorney informed prosecutor Donoghue that Darren was prepared to accept a plea agreement. After consultation with Eliza and other victims, prosecutors offered terms. Darren would plead guilty to all charges, provide complete information about any additional conspirators or attacks, and receive a 20-year federal sentence to be served concurrently with state sentences in Arizona. In exchange, prosecutors would not seek the maximum 25-year term. On March 3, 2025, almost exactly 1 year after the attack on Eliza, Darren Keller stood before Judge Diaz and entered guilty pleas to all charges. His statement to the court, required as part of the plea agreement, provided the final confirmation of what the evidence had already established. "I targeted Eliza Reeves because of her transgender identity," Keller stated, his voice flat and emotionless. "The attack was premeditated and coordinated with my cousins as part of our ongoing campaign. The DNA evidence from her fingernails is mine, collected when she fought back during the assault. With this admission, the legal phase of Eliza's case effectively concluded. The DNA evidence that had started as a small collection of skin cells beneath her fingernails had ultimately unraveled an interstate conspiracy of hatred and violence. What remained was the formal sentencing, scheduled for early April, and the broader process of healing and reform that Eliza had already begun through Phoenix Rising. As March progressed, media coverage of the case prompted increased attention to hate crimes nationwide. Legal experts analyzed the prosecution's innovative approach, particularly the use of familial DNA matching and interjurisdictional cooperation. Advocacy organizations cited the case as evidence of both the ongoing threats faced by transgender individuals and the possibility of effective justice when authorities properly prioritize such crimes. For Detective Morgan Vance, the case represented both a professional triumph and a sobering education. "I thought I understood hate crimes before," she confided to Captain Torres during their case review. But this investigation revealed something more insidious, the methodical, networked nature of modern hate. These weren't impulsive attacks. They were calculated operations with planning, coordination, and documentation. As the anniversary of the attack approached, Eliza organized a community gathering through Phoenix Rising, not to commemorate the violence, but to celebrate the resilience and unity that had emerged in response. The event, held in a downtown park with security provided by supportive police officers, drew hundreds of participants from across Arizona. "A year ago, I was fighting for my life in a parking garage," Eliza told the assembled crowd. "Today, we're standing together in the sunlight, visible and unafraid. The DNA evidence that caught my attacker came from my decision to fight back. That's what we're all doing now. Fighting back, not just against individual attackers, but against the systems and attitudes that enable them." As she spoke, Eliza didn't know that her case had already begun influencing police departments nationwide, with new training protocols being developed based on the Phoenix investigation. Nor could she have anticipated how the legal precedents established would affect future prosecutions of organized hate groups. But she understood the fundamental truth that had emerged from her ordeal, that even in the darkest moments, the evidence of resistance, whether literal DNA or metaphorical courage, could ultimately illuminate the path to justice. April 2025 arrived in Phoenix with a burst of desert wildflowers, the landscape transformed by winter rains into a briefly vibrant palette before the summer heat would reclaim dominance. This natural cycle of transformation seemed fitting as Eliza Reeves prepared for the final legal chapter in a case that had redefined her life. On April 7th, the federal courthouse in downtown Phoenix filled beyond capacity for the sentencing hearing of Darren Keller. Security was unprecedented, with federal marshals and local police establishing a perimeter around the building. Both supporters of the transgender community and a smaller contingent of protesters, aligned with Keller's ideology, gathered outside, separated by barricades and monitored by riot-equipped officers. Inside courtroom 3B, Judge Mariana Diaz presided over proceedings that had taken on symbolic importance far beyond a typical sentencing. Prosecutor Donahue had prepared meticulously, coordinating with victims from all 3 states who wished to deliver impact statements. Eliza would speak last, a position she had requested to ensure other victims' voices were heard. The hearing began with a review of the plea agreement and confirmed charges. Darren Keller sat impassively beside his attorney, his demeanor subdued compared to earlier appearances. When Judge Diaz asked if he wished to make a statement before sentencing, he declined through his counsel, a departure from his previous eagerness to justify his actions. For the next 2 hours, victims addressed the court. A transgender woman from Tucson described abandoning her career after being attacked by Victor Keller. A college student from Las Vegas explained how Eric Keller's assault had forced him to leave school. Each account built upon the previous one, creating a composite picture of lives disrupted and communities terrorized. When Eliza's turn came, she approached the podium with the steady gait that had replaced her earlier limp, a physical manifestation of her recovery. Dressed in a simple blue suit, she carried no notes, having decided to speak from the heart rather than from prepared text. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and measured, 13 months ago I was attacked because someone decided my existence was a threat to their worldview. What Mr. Keller and his cousins didn't understand, what they couldn't understand, is that surviving as a transgender person already requires extraordinary strength. When he attacked me, he didn't encounter weakness. He encountered a lifetime of resilience, Eliza continued, addressing not just the judge, but the entire courtroom. The DNA evidence that led to this conviction came from my decision to fight back. That evidence didn't just identify one attacker. It exposed a network of organized hatred. This case has never been about just one assault or one victim. It's about recognizing that hatred left unchecked becomes systematic, coordinated, and increasingly dangerous. As she spoke, Eliza maintained steady eye contact with Darren Keller, who finally looked away first. I don't speak today seeking vengeance. I speak seeking transformation of our legal system, our communities, and yes, even of those who have chosen hatred. The sentence imposed today matters not just as punishment, but as a clear statement that targeting people for their identity carries serious consequences. Eliza concluded her statement with words that would be quoted in news reports nationwide. My recovery began the moment I chose to scratch back rather than simply endure. Our collective recovery begins when we acknowledge that justice isn't passive. It requires active resistance against organized hatred and committed protection of vulnerable communities. After all victim statements concluded, Judge Diaz addressed the court. A 58-year-old jurist known for thorough legal analysis, she had clearly been moved by the testimony while maintaining her professional demeanor. This court has considered the plea agreement, the pre-sentencing reports, and the powerful impact statements presented today, she began. The crimes committed by the defendant represent not just violence against individuals, but an attack on the fundamental principle that all people deserve to live free from fear and persecution, regardless of their identity. Judge Diaz reviewed the sentencing considerations, noting the premeditated nature of the crimes, their organization across state lines, and their targeted focus on a protected class. She acknowledged Keller's eventual acceptance of responsibility through his guilty plea, while also recognizing it came only after overwhelming evidence made denial untenable. Balancing these factors, she concluded, this court sentences Darren Keller to 18 years in federal prison, to be served concurrently with his state sentences from Arizona. This sentence reflects both the severity of the crimes committed and the defendant's cooperation in providing information about additional conspirators. The sentence, 2 years less than the prosecution had requested but substantially more than the 12 years the defense had sought, represented a middle ground that acknowledged cooperation while still imposing significant consequences. For Eliza, the specific number of years mattered less than the public recognition of the crime's severity. As Keller was led from the courtroom, Eliza exchanged a meaningful glance with Detective Vance, who had been seated in the front row throughout the proceedings. Their 13-month journey from crime scene to justice had forged a connection that transcended the typical investigator-victim relationship. Outside the courthouse, Eliza addressed the gathered media with Phoenix Rising members, standing behind her in solidarity. Today's sentence represents accountability for one network of hatred, she stated. Our work continues in ensuring that all transgender people receive equal protection under the law and equal respect in our communities. In the days following the sentencing, the ripple effects of the case continued to spread. Arizona Governor Michelle Martinez announced the formation of a hate crimes task force modeled on the team that had investigated Eliza's case. The state legislature expedited consideration of enhanced bias crime legislation that had previously stalled in committee. On April 15th, the Department of Justice issued new guidelines for investigating and prosecuting networked hate crimes, specifically citing the Keller case as demonstrating the effectiveness of treating organized, bias-motivated violence, similar to organized crime or terrorism networks rather than as isolated incidents. For Detective Morgan Vance, the case's conclusion brought professional recognition, but also a new direction. Captain Torres approached her about developing and leading a specialized unit focused on bias-motivated crimes, an opportunity she accepted after thoughtful consideration. This case changed how I understand these crimes, Vance explained during the unit's first planning meeting. We need to look beyond individual incidents to identify patterns, networks, and coordinated activities. The digital evidence is often as important as the physical evidence. Meanwhile, Eliza channeled her experience into expanding Phoenix Rising's mission. What had begun as a support group for transgender victims of violence had evolved into an advocacy organization with significant influence. In late April, the group received a substantial grant from a national foundation to develop training programs for law enforcement agencies nationwide. We're creating a curriculum that helps officers understand not just how to investigate these crimes, but how to build trust with communities that have historically been hesitant to engage with police, Eliza explained to the organization's growing staff. Detective Vance has agreed to help develop these materials based on her experience with our case. The first of these training sessions was held on May 12th at the Arizona Police Academy. Eliza and Detective Vance jointly presented to a class of recruits and veteran officers, sharing both the technical aspects of the investigation and the personal impact of bias-motivated violence. The DNA evidence was crucial, Vance told the officers during her portion of the presentation, but equally important was creating an environment where the victim felt safe reporting and participating in the investigation. Without Eliza's trust and cooperation, we might never have identified the broader conspiracy. When Eliza took her turn speaking, she emphasized the perspective of those who had historically feared rather than sought police assistance. Many transgender individuals have experienced discrimination from law enforcement, she acknowledged. Breaking through that barrier requires demonstrating that you see us as full citizens deserving of protection and justice, not as problems to be managed. By early summer, the training program had expanded to departments in neighboring states. Phoenix Rising had grown to a staff of 12, with programs addressing prevention, victim services, and legal advocacy. Eliza, while remaining the organization's public face, had also begun pursuing a degree in criminal justice, a field she had never previously considered, but now saw as a potential path for systemic change. On June 17th, exactly 15 months after the attack, Eliza received a phone call from Prosecutor Donahue with unexpected news. Darren Keller had requested a meeting with her. After his sentencing, he had been transferred to a federal facility in Colorado to begin serving his term. "You absolutely don't have to do this," Donahue emphasized. "He has no right to your time or attention, but his request seems genuine. He claims to want to apologize." Eliza took several days to consider the request, consulting with her therapist and close friends from Phoenix Rising. Ultimately, she decided to agree to a monitored video conference rather than an in-person meeting, establishing boundaries while allowing for the possibility of meaningful exchange. The conversation, held on June 25th under strict supervision, lasted only 12 minutes but represented a remarkable coda to the case. Keller, appearing noticeably thinner in his prison uniform, spoke with a humility entirely absent from his previous court appearances. "I've had a lot of time to think," he began, after awkward initial greetings. "The story I told myself about protecting society was really about fear and inability to accept change. I know words can't undo what I did to you and others, but I needed to tell you I recognize the harm I caused." Eliza listened carefully, searching for manipulation in his statement, but finding what appeared to be genuine remorse. "What changed?" she asked simply. "Prison ministry program paired me with a chaplain who happens to be transgender," Keller replied. "First time I'd ever actually talked with someone rather than about them. He didn't excuse anything I'd done, but he helped me see the humanity I'd been denying." While careful not to offer immediate forgiveness or emotional closure that might serve Keller more than herself, Eliza acknowledged his statement. "Recognition of harm is the first step. What matters now is what you do with that recognition for the next 18 years and beyond." As summer progressed, the legal after-effects of the case continued. Victor and Eric Keller received reduced sentences of 10 and 8 years respectively in exchange for their cooperation, which had led to investigations of 3 additional members of their online network. The Gender Reality Alliance Forum had been shut down, its server data preserved as evidence in ongoing investigations. In August, the Arizona State Bar Association invited Eliza to address their annual conference on the topic of bias crimes and legal representation. Standing before hundreds of attorneys, judges, and legal scholars, she articulated the perspective that had emerged from her journey. "The law functions as both mirror and catalyst for social change," she told the assembled legal professionals. "It reflects our existing values while also challenging us to live up to our highest principles. When the law treats crimes against marginalized communities with the same seriousness as any other offense, it sends a powerful message about equal protection and human dignity." By autumn, Phoenix Rising had established partnerships with similar organizations in 12 states, creating a national network for coordinating responses to bias-motivated violence. Their database of incidents, developed with assistance from criminologists at Arizona State University, became a valuable resource for identifying patterns that might indicate networked rather than isolated attacks. On September 17th, 6 months after the sentencing, Detective Vance invited Eliza to speak to her newly formed specialized unit. As Eliza entered the police department, a building she had once entered in trauma and fear, she was greeted with respect by officers who recognized her not just as a victim, but as a partner in improving law enforcement practices. "Your case changed how we approach these crimes," Vance told Eliza before the presentation. "But your advocacy afterward is changing how we understand our role in the community." Later that evening, during a quiet dinner with close friends from Phoenix Rising, Eliza reflected on the transformation of the past 18 months. From the moment of violence in a darkened parking garage to her emergence as a recognized advocate for justice, her path had been neither linear nor easy. The trauma remained, emerging in unexpected moments of anxiety or hypervigilance, but it no longer defined her daily experience. "Sometimes I still wonder who I would have been if this hadn't happened," she admitted to her friends. "But then I remember that's not the right question. The question is who I choose to be now, knowing what I know, and having seen both the worst and best of humanity." As autumn deepened toward winter, Eliza continued balancing her studies, advocacy work, and personal healing. The case that had begun with her DNA evidence scratched from her attacker's skin had expanded far beyond a single investigation or prosecution. It had become a catalyst for examining how society responds to organized hatred and how victims can transform their experience into meaningful change. On December 15, 2025, almost 2 years after the attack, Phoenix Rising opened a dedicated resource center in downtown Phoenix, a visible, accessible space offering services, community gathering areas, and training facilities. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, attended by community members, law enforcement officials, and local leaders, Eliza stood not as someone defined by victimhood, but as a builder of new possibilities. "This center exists because we refuse to be silenced," she told the gathered crowd. "It exists because evidence of resistance, whether DNA under fingernails or courage in courtrooms, can transform individual trauma into collective justice. Most importantly, it exists because we believe that the response to organized hatred must be organized compassion, protection, and belonging." As Eliza cut the ribbon, Detective Vance stood among the applauding crowd, witnessing the completion of a circle that had begun with evidence collection in a parking garage and culminated in a community resource that would help prevent similar attacks. The case file might be closed, but its impact continued to grow, a testament to how justice, when properly pursued, can become transformation.